Hi friends, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Sarah, and on this channel we talk about ways to make your music classroom more joyful and meaningful for you and your students. Today's video is all about ways to reflect on last year. How did it go? What went well? What didn't? What did you accomplish? How does that match up to what you hope to accomplish? What can you do to sort of look ahead for next year? But really, that's going to be a separate video about planning for next year. Today we're talking all about how to reflect meaningfully on what you did this past year. As I'm reflecting on this past year, where I was in a new position teaching pre-K through 4, I'm thinking about content, feedback I got from admins and teachers, and relationships that I built. The first big thing that comes into my mind when I think about reflecting on this past year for me is what went well and what didn't go well. And I know those are very broad categories, so that's why I'm going to kind of break it down into the content, feedback, and relationships subcategories there. First, let's look at content. So basically what that means to me is, what did I teach? What did students learn? What did students show me that they knew and could do proficiently? And what do I wish I had done more of? And this is where I look back at my lesson plans. I track everything on paper. I know some people do things digitally. Some people go by just sort of a scope and sequence and may jot down a few things that they did each day. You know, whatever works for you. I keep track of what I do with my students on a simple template that documents like how we opened class, the meat of the lesson that we did, what activities, what songs, what content we covered, and a closing, and then maybe a spot for just some notes that I might put, like, oh, we didn't quite get to this, or so and so many people didn't get a turn today, things like that. No matter how you keep track of your lesson plans, that's something that you, I think, are going to want to keep from year to year, either in paper format, like I write my lesson plans down on paper, or if you digitize, I think that's something you're going to want to keep for several years down the line, just to make sure that you are using that to improve your teaching and improve the scope and sequence and maybe the pacing and the order of things, just tweaking from year to year. It can be hard to look at your plans and sort of generalize and boil down, what did you do this whole year? I mean, theoretically, I saw students like 36 times, and looking back at 36 plans and boiling that down to the big ideas is admittedly difficult. But something that I like to do is think back to maybe my best lesson days. When were the days, like what are the days that I remember best? Or what were the days where I can remember students responding in the best way? You know, students were enjoying themselves, students were moving around. There was a good mix of teacher-led and maybe more student-directed. Basically, what were some of the highlights of the year? And no matter what the content was or what you were teaching at that time, if there's anything, any specific strategy or hook that you did for that particular lesson, you may want to apply that to something that you plan to do next year too. If you have colleagues in your field, like directly, like I have one other music colleague in my district, it might be a good idea, if you haven't already, to get together with them or communicate with them somehow as to what you accomplished and how that might affect them going forward, or maybe even doing sort of a backwards planning thing where you think about where do you want them to be in this top grade and what needs to happen prior to that in each of the grade levels to make sure that they're musically ready to reach those goals. I'm all about meaning and joy in the elementary music classroom, but that still means I have to teach content, I have to teach skills, because as students progress through their musical career in elementary school, we want them to be able to achieve higher level musicianship, it's always a hard word for me, as they get older, so they can do more things and feel more empowered as student musicians. So you may have taught tempo, you may have taught note names. Did students show that they knew those things? And that's something that relates to this sort of administrative feedback category that you can reflect on too. But something that administration is going to be looking for, that is something you as the music teacher also want to be thinking about, is here's the thing you taught. How did students show that they were proficient in that content area? For example, in 4th grade this year, I taught barred instruments, which requires a whole bunch of different skills that we had to practice before getting them to a certain level of independence on the instruments. How did students show me that? How did I know that they were ready to move on? And was there meaning in this for me and for them? And what I mean by that is, were students able to connect to what we were doing in a way that had meaning for them personally? And I personally, as I reflect back, think I could have gone farther with the idea of proficiency in barred instruments, to the point of, and I wish this could have happened if the year just didn't pan out this way for me, but I wish the end point of that unit could have been writing their own songs. And what that tells me, the fact that we didn't quite get to come full circle with the idea of learning how to perform and then compose, is that my pacing was a little off. How did I structure those lessons? Did I spend too much time in one area and not another? Did I not differentiate my instruction enough for certain students? Were we all doing the same thing too much of the time? Could I have given some people a little more independence or a little more guidance? And that's very specific reflection. That's something that you can put in an end of year sort of evaluative summary, or if you have like a teacher goal that you were working on, that's something that you can communicate to your observer, which in my case was my principal, about how specifically you are self-reflecting on your teaching based on what students were able to show you, and how that relates to ways you could improve your instruction. The second category where I like to reflect back on is feedback. Any kind of feedback I got from my observers, administrators, fellow colleagues, or parents and community members. If you are getting a consistent piece of feedback from an administrator like I was this year, specifically about how I close my lessons, that's something that you might want to adjust for next year. So I tend to run out of time and not wrap up my lessons in a way that I think a lot of administrators just want to see. So there's no coming back together at the end of class. I shouldn't say there's no. Sometimes we get there, but sometimes we just don't. So that piece of feedback about really trying to make sure that you wrap up your lessons in a more meaningful way was something that stuck with me through the year, and I don't think I necessarily got much better at. So as I reflect on that, that's just a personal goal I have for next year is, all right, so pacing needs to change. And I need to find a way that is quick and meaningful for students to reflect on what they learned in class and convey that to me as well. The last category that I like to reflect on is relationships. I had never met any of my students that I had this year before because I was in this new position. I knew hardly any of the colleagues that I worked with. I work in 3 separate buildings. So as I'm looking back, I'm thinking, how did I make connections with students? Were there any students that I just didn't connect with? And there were. How can I fix that next year? How can I change my approach to working with new students to make sure that they know that I care about them and I want to get to know them and that I want them to have a good time in my classroom? But there are definitely places for me personally where I could have improved. Besides the big category or big guiding questions of what went well last year and what didn't, you also might want to consider thinking about what is important to you as a teacher. And did those things, those values come across in your teaching? Did you notice it, and could your students have noticed it as well? For me personally, humor is very important to me as a teacher. I want to be funny. I want students to laugh. I want students to know that they can be silly, but in control in my classroom. Did that happen this year? And as I'm personally reflecting back, I think, I was able to come across as someone who was humorous and enjoyed being silly, but had the skills to reconvene and be in control of myself. So humor is important to me. Did that come across? Yeah, it did. Another thing that is important to me is having students experience music in a variety of ways. So something that I'm reflecting on last year that we didn't do as much of as I think we could have is reading books and stories, especially non-seasonal ones. So we read The Nutcracker in the winter. We read The Runaway Walk. I think a few classes read The Jazz Fly, but I'm thinking back and wishing that, if I had a book that I could supplement this piece of content with, or I could have this whole unit in the fall where I can read this book because we're talking about, in the fall we always talk about fast and slow. That's just something that I personally wish I had done more of, because that's a value that's important to me, bringing diverse literature into my classroom. Is continuity perhaps something that you value in your classroom? Having some bits of connection that are virtually the same or very, very similar from class to class, having similar routines or having similar themes. Did that happen this year? As you look back on your plans, can you see that there was some kind of continuity? So to sum all of this up, ways to reflect on last year, I would say some categories and some guiding questions. So if you're looking at content, some questions you might want to ask yourself as you look back on your plans and reflect on the lessons that you did are, what did you teach? What did students learn? How did they show you that they had mastered it or made progress in it? What didn't go so well content-wise this year? What had you hoped to get to by the end of first grade that maybe you didn't quite make it there? Or what's a unit that you really, really want to do in the upper elementary grades that you could have prepared your lower elementary school students better for? Guiding questions you can ask yourself about feedback you received. Were there any pieces of feedback that you got from teachers, community members, parents, administrators about ways to improve your teaching, or little like hints or tips that they wanted to advise you on that you can start to think about ways to apply to your classroom and your teaching? Was there any constructive criticism that you received that you understand and want to try to work on? And big guiding questions about relationships. Did you make connections this year? Were there any students that you didn't quite make a connection with? Or if you're in a position where you've been teaching there for several years, are there any students that you know you haven't really connected with that you are making any kind of progress with? How can you find little ways to adjust your relationship building for next year? And lastly, reflecting on the values you have as an educator. What is important to you for your classroom and for your students? And how did that come across or not come across this year? If you have any specific questions on how to reflect on a particular unit or a grade level, or a concept like continuity or routines, or accepting criticism or any kind of feedback from someone else who has seen you in action, feel free to reach out to me either via email or on Instagram, or drop a comment below. I'd be thrilled to engage in a conversation with you about how to reflect meaningfully on those type of things. If you found this video helpful, I would appreciate it if you gave it a thumbs up, or if you subscribe to my channel. That helps other teachers like you find my content and learn from it and implement it in their own classrooms. Do check the description box below for more resources to help you in your classroom. I have a blog, I'm active on Instagram. Of course, there's this YouTube channel. I also have an email list where you can subscribe to weekly, sometimes twice a week emails about concepts like this: how to improve your teaching, how to make your music classes more joyful, inclusive, how to manage classrooms, any kind of topics that have to do with elementary music and bringing more joy and meaning into the classroom for you and for your students. Thanks again so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy music making.